Hello, welcome to the podcast AnonX. We're diving deep today into one of those stories that just, it never seems to fade away. A lost world, this powerful civilization gone.
Atlantis. Yep, the legendary lost city. It's really captured imaginations for millennia, hasn't it?
Absolutely. And you can see why. We've got a whole pile of your sources here, articles, research notes, all sorts of things. And our mission today is try and cut through the speculation. We want to figure out what these sources actually tell us about Atlantis. Where did the story even come from? Was it ever real? And what do all these theories really boil down to?
It's such a fascinating mix, isn't it? You've got history, philosophy, a lot of, wishful thinking maybe, and just pure mystery wrapped up together. Our goal here is really to pull out the key insights from all this material you've provided, just to give you the clearest possible picture of this really complex topic.
All right, let's get into it then. You can't really talk about Atlantis without starting with the person who basically invented it for us, right? Plato.
Exactly. The whole idea, pretty much everything we think we know about Atlantis, it starts with Plato, the ancient Greek philosopher. Your sources all point back to his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. These were written, around 2,400 years ago? One source says 360 BC specifically. That's the origin.
Okay, so what kind of picture did Plato paint? What was Atlantis actually like, according to his writings?
Well, he described this incredibly powerful kingdom, hugely wealthy, an island nation, and this is key, located west of the Pillars of Hercules.
So that's the Strait of Gibraltar now, way out in the Atlantic, not the Mediterranean.
That's where he put it. And the people, the Atlanteans, Plato said they were originally almost godlike, semi-divine. But over time, and your sources really highlight this, they got greedy. They became obsessed with wealth, with power, basically becoming, as Plato put it, more like humans and less like gods.
That sounds very Plato. Using a story to make a point about virtue and corruption.
It absolutely does. But the level of detail he included is just, astonishing. He depicted this really advanced civilization. Think sophisticated buildings apparently decorated with gold and silver, intricate stone structures. He even mentioned what sounds like a pretty advanced plumbing system.
Plumbing?
Yeah, providing hot and cold running water for baths. Not just for people, but get this, even for their horses. Plus, the sources mention this huge, magnificent temple dedicated to Poseidon, the sea god, supposedly covered in gold, with a massive statue inside.
Hot and cold water for horses thousands of years ago. Okay, yeah, that is the kind of detail that makes you stop and think, what's going on here?
And the geography he described was just as specific. A huge island, one source even suggests it was continent-sized, with a central city built in rings.
Rings.
Concentric rings, yeah. Rings of land and water connected by canals. Outside the city, vast fertile plains for farming, and then mountains beyond that. And Poseidon, fittingly, was their main god and ruler.
Okay, so they're powerful, rich, incredibly advanced, but then things go wrong. Plato said the gods weren't pleased.
Precisely. According to Plato's story, Zeus and the other gods saw this corruption, this fall from grace, and decided the Atlanteans had to be punished. They'd abandoned their virtue.
And the punishment wasn't subtle, I take it.
Not at all. Utterly catastrophic is how your sources describe it. Plato wrote about a great fire and massive earthquakes hitting the island. And the result? The entire civilization just sank beneath the waves, disappeared completely in a single day and night.
Wow, just vanished. Which, okay, brings us right to the heart of it all, the big question. Was Plato telling a true story, maybe a distorted history, or was this just a brilliant myth, a fable to teach a lesson?
That is the central debate, isn't it? And it's been raging for centuries. Your sources lay out both sides pretty clearly. On one hand, many, probably most, scholars believe Plato meant it as an allegory, a philosophical tool, a way to warn about ambition, hubris, what happens when a society loses its moral compass. From that perspective, all the incredible detail isn't proof it was real. It's just Plato being a master storyteller, using a vivid narrative to get his philosophical points across.
So the rings, the location near Gibraltar, even the date he gave, that's all just stage dressing for the philosophy.
For many scholars, yes, it's part of his literary technique, his dialectical method. But, and this is a big but for the believers, is because he included those specifics, like the location, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, and a date way back around 9,600 BC. That's what makes others think, maybe he was drawing on something real, perhaps not a direct history, but maybe a memory, a legend based on a real place or a real catastrophic event that got passed down.
Right, so people started wondering, maybe even looking for it, quite early on.
There was some early interest, yeah. Your sources mention Crantor. He was actually a student of Plato's own student. Legend has it, he traveled to Egypt and supposedly found these pillars with inscriptions that seemed to back up Plato's story. Though, like your sources say, that's mostly considered legend itself. After that initial flurry, the story kind of faded for a long, long time, really, only to be picked up again much, much later.
And once it was revived, with those juicy details from Plato, the hunt was on. Where have people actually looked? Where are the main candidates, according to your sources?
Oh, the list of proposed locations is huge, all over the map, literally. But one of the most popular theories, definitely highlighted in your sources, focuses on the Greek island of Santorini.
Santorini, the one with the massive volcano caldera.
That's the one. This theory connects Atlantis to the Minoan civilization. They were a really advanced Bronze Age culture based on Crete and also on Santorini, which was called Sarah back then, around 300 to 600 years ago.
Okay, so what's the connection? Why Santorini?
Well, your sources point out some interesting similarities. The Minoans, like Plato's Atlanteans, had advanced architecture, impressive palaces, sophisticated plumbing and irrigation. In Santorini's geography, with the caldera, some see the circular shape of the remaining islands around the lagoon as echoing Plato's description of concentric rings and maybe a central canal. Plus, crucially, it has that volcano.
Right, the volcano. That obviously ties into the whole destruction part of the Atlantis story.
Exactly. The idea is that a truly colossal volcanic eruption on Santorini, which we know happened around 1500 BC, one of the biggest in recorded history, would have triggered enormous tsunamis. These waves could have wigged out Minoan coastal settlements across the Aegean, fitting the narrative of a powerful island culture suddenly destroyed by a natural disaster, sinking beneath the waves.
Okay, that sounds plausible in a way. But wait, Plato said 9,600 BC. The Santorini eruption was 1,500 BC. That's what, an 8,000-year gap? That's huge.
That is the single biggest problem for the Santorini theory, and your sources absolutely emphasize it. The scale is also different. Santorini is an island, but Plato described Atlantis as potentially continent-sized. Now, to try and bridge that massive time gap, one source mentions Angelos Gallinopoulos. Back in the 1960s, he suggested maybe Plato's numbers got mixed up in translation over the centuries. He proposed like a decimal point error, maybe a symbol for 100 was misread as 1,000, somewhere along the line. If you divide Plato's date by 10, you get much closer to the Minoan era, maybe 1,500 to 1,000 BC.
Huh. A translation error? That's one way to try and make it fit, I guess, but it feels like a bit of a stretch.
It definitely requires making an assumption about the text that we can't prove. It's a potential explanation, but far from certain.
Okay, so Santorini is a major contender, but with big issues. Where else? I feel like I've heard the Bermuda Triangle mentioned in connection with Atlantis.
You have, yeah. That comes up in your sources, often linked to more, let's say, fringe theories. Charles Berlitz wrote a book, which one source calls pseudo-history, connecting Atlantis to that whole Bermuda Triangle mystery zone. His idea wasn't just that Atlantis sank there, but that the triangle itself might be some kind of gateway or portal to the lost city.
A gateway. Okay, that's definitely moving beyond standard archaeology.
Absolutely. And often tied into that is the Bimini Road, this underwater structure near the Bahamas found in 1968. It's these rows of large stones that, well, they do look a bit like paving stones or a wall underwater. So naturally, some people immediately thought, aha, remnants of Atlantis.
But what do scientists say about the Bimini Road now?
Your sources are pretty clear here. Geologists have studied it extensively, and the overwhelming scientific consensus is that the Bimini Road is a natural formation. It's called beach rock, basically limestone, that formed along an ancient coastline and then got submerged. Natural erosion patterns made it look like blocks, not man-made.
Okay, so Bimini's out. What about Antarctica? I remember reading something about that. That seems completely wild, putting it at the South Pole when Plato said near Spain.
It's certainly a leap. And your source explicitly labels the main theory behind it, Charles Hapgood's Earth's shifting crust idea, as pseudoscience. Hapgood's theory, from the 1950s, was that the Earth's entire outer crust could suddenly shift, moving continents drastically. He suggested Antarctica wasn't always at the South Pole. He thought maybe around 12,000 years ago, which roughly matches Plato's time frame, it was located much further north, maybe near the Atlantic, and had a temperate climate.
And that's where he thought Atlantis was.
Yes. He proposed that this warmer northern Antarctica was home to Atlantis. Then a sudden crustal displacement shifted it violently southward, burying the city under miles of ice. There was even some excitement mentioned in one source about a large structure found under the Antarctic ice, something huge, like the size of the Eiffel Tower.
Not Atlantis, I'm guessing.
Nope. Scientists looked into it and concluded those structures are almost certainly natural geological features, likely subglacial ridges or sediment structures. And the big scientific pushback is the timeline. Yes, Antarctica was warmer and further north, but that was like 90 million years ago, dinosaur times, not 12,000 years ago. The geology just doesn't support it being near the Atlantic then.
Right. Okay, so Santorini, Bermuda, Antarctica. Any other interesting locations mentioned in the sources, just to show the range of ideas?
Yeah, your sources list a few more just to give a sense of how wide the net has been cast.
Yeah.
There was a Swedish scholar in the 17th century, Olaus Rudbeck. He decided Atlantis must have been in Sweden, specifically Old Uppsala. Never mind Plato putting it thousands of miles away near Gibraltar. Apparently, finding some large ancient skeletons nearby convinced him they were Atlantean giants.
Sweden. Based on tall skeletons. Okay, that's certainly thinking outside the box.
Or outside the Mediterranean, anyway. Then there's Malta. It's closer to Greece, has some incredibly old ruins, and there are submerged structures nearby. But your sources point out it doesn't really match. Plato's description lacks the big plain, the mountains. Another one, identified using a computer program analyzing Plato's clues, is Souss Massa in Morocco. Michael Huebner pinpointed it based on geographical details. Problem is, it's now a dry region, lacks the water Plato described, and again, no actual ruins of an advanced city have been found there.
And Spain itself, Tartessos.
Yeah, Tartessos gets mentioned. It was a real, wealthy, ancient civilization near Gibraltar in an area known for earthquakes and tsunamis. So location and destruction mechanism kind of fit. But the big issue noted in your sources is Tartessos was on the mainland. It wasn't a huge island nation like Plato described Atlantis.
Okay, so it wasn't just about where it was, but what it was. Plato described this advanced society. Did people speculate about their technology? Or beyond just the gods were angry, what might have actually caused the fall?
Oh, definitely. Theories about advanced Atlantean knowledge or tech popped up. Ignatius Donnelly, who really kicked off the modern Atlantis craze in the late 1800s, he thought Atlanteans had things like gunpowder and paper. He argued that survivors spread this knowledge around the world, basically seeding other ancient civilizations like the Egyptians and Mayans.
Right, the idea of Atlantis as this sort of mother culture to everyone else.
Exactly. And then you get into even more speculative territory. Helena Blavatsky, founder of Theosophy, your source, flags this as coming from a religious spiritual context, not historical research she wrote about Atlanteans being these sort of superhumans. She claimed they could travel in airships and even had electricity flowing through their bodies, things like that.
Okay, airships and body electricity. We're definitely drifting far from Plato's original text there.
Pretty far, yeah. And as for the cause of the fall, you have Plato's divine punishment from Zeus. But people looking for a natural explanation have explored various disasters. We talked about the Santorini volcano theory. Others suggest massive earthquakes, maybe a mega flood event. One source mentions Graham Hancock's theory, linking it to an asteroid or comet impact around 12,000 years ago, causing catastrophic floods. Though it notes this idea is really controversial and lacks solid scientific backing.
So with all this searching, theorizing, fringe ideas, how has modern technology changed the game? Can we actually find something like Atlantis now? And how does this story still echo in our culture today?
Well, modern tech is incredible for archaeology. Your sources bring up the example of Ubar, the Atlantis of the Sands in Oman. It was lost for centuries under the desert. But they found it using satellite imagery, Landsat data, and then ground-penetrating radar, GPR. So yes, technology absolutely can uncover lost cities buried under sand or potentially water.
And are people using that tech to look for Atlantis?
Oh, absolutely. Oceanographers use incredibly sophisticated sonar mapping, submersible vehicles, remote sensing. All that stuff is deployed in underwater exploration. However, your sources are quite clear. Despite mapping huge swaths of the ocean floor in amazing detail, nothing remotely matching Plato's description of a large sunken continent or city has been definitively located.
Why not? If it was there, wouldn't we see something with all that tech?
The main challenge, the sources suggest, is that if any ruins do exist, they'd likely be buried under thousands of years of sediment. We're talking potentially thick layers of mud and sand covering everything up. That can make detection really difficult, even for advanced sonar or radar systems. It could be there, just hidden beneath the muck.
So the jury's still out on finding physical proof, but the idea of Atlantis is definitely alive and well. Where do we see it popping up in, say, movies or books today?
It's everywhere in pop culture, as your sources, including that Reddit thread, point out.
Yeah.
A big one is the Disney animated movie from 2001, Atlantis. the Lost Empire.
Oh, right. I remember that one. It had a very distinct look.
It really did. Your source mentions its unique visual style was heavily influenced by Mike Mignola, the creator of Hellboy comics. And get this, they actually hired Mark Okrand, the linguist who created the Klingon language for Star Trek, to develop a whole functional Atlantean language just for the movie.
No way. A whole language. That's dedication.
It is. The film didn't smash the box office, but your source says it's become a bit of a cult classic, often mentioned alongside other animated adventures like Treasure Planet or Titan AE. And you see Atlantis referenced elsewhere too, like in the Aquaman comics and movies, which one source briefly notes it's just part of our modern mythology.
Okay, so let's try and sum this up. We've gone from Plato's dialogues through centuries of searching, looked at all these different theories from Santorini to Antarctica, considered the tech. Where does the mainstream scientific and historical community actually land on Atlantis today? Is it viewed as a real possibility, or is it pretty much filed under myth or even pseudoscience?
Based on your sources, the consensus view is pretty clear. Most legitimate historians, archaeologists, and scientists regard Atlantis as a symbolic narrative created by Plato. They see it as a philosophical allegory, a cautionary tale about hubris and the downfall of corrupt society, not as a factual historical account of a real lost civilization.
And what's the biggest piece of evidence leaning that way? The smoking gun, so to speak.
The most crucial point really emphasized in your sources is the silence. The complete lack of any mention of Atlantis in any other surviving ancient text from that period or before. Plato introduces it, says he heard it from others, but no other Greek historian, no Egyptian records, no one else talks about this huge, powerful island empire that supposedly waged war and then vanished catastrophically. If it were real and interacted with the known world, you'd expect some other record, but there's nothing outside Plato.
And the lack of physical evidence, despite the searches.
Exactly. With all our modern ocean mapping technology, we still haven't found any convincing trace of a large sunken landmass or city matching Plato's detailed description where he said it should be, or anywhere else for that matter.
So those more out there theories, like Hapgood's shifting crust or the Bermuda Triangle stuff.
Yeah, your sources categorize theories like those from Berlitz, Hapgood, and even Hancock's asteroid impact idea, generally as pseudoscience within the mainstream scientific community. That's usually because they lack solid evidence, or they rely on misinterpreting data, or they invoke mechanisms like sudden global crust shifts or mysterious energy fields that just aren't supported by established science.
But the Santorini idea, that one still seems to have some traction, at least as an inspiration.
It does. Your sources suggest the Santorini-Minoan connection remains probably the most discussed potential inspiration for Plato's story, even with the massive timeline problems. It's seen less as, this was Atlantis, and more as this real historical event, a powerful Bronze Age island culture devastated by a volcano and tsunamis might have been a distant echo, a kernel of an idea that Plato then took and creatively transformed into his philosophical allegory. It's a plausible historical parallel, not proof of Atlantis itself.
Okay. So we've journeyed from Plato's dialogues through all the searching and speculating over centuries, right up to modern science.
It's definitely clear the story has incredible staying power. And even though the overwhelming scientific and historical consensus leans towards it being a brilliant allegory,
it just keeps capturing our imagination. Why do you think that is? Why does Atlantis still fascinate us so much after all this time, even without solid proof?
well, looking at everything in your sources, it's probably a combination of things. It's the sheer detail Plato provided, which feels so real. It's that timeless human fascination with lost golden ages, with advanced civilizations that vanished. Maybe it's the allure of the unknown, especially the deep ocean. And perhaps, just perhaps, that tiny, nagging possibility, however remote, that some historical truth, however distorted, might be buried in there somewhere.
Yeah, it taps into something deep, doesn't it? Our fascination with mystery, maybe our anxieties about our own civilizations. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Why does this idea, this dream of a lost, advanced world like Atlantis, hold such a powerful, enduring grip on our collective imagination, driving stories and searches for millennia, even when all the evidence seems to point another way? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.